so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this brief webinar with us today. Um, if you don't know me, my name is Elisa Gurman. I'm a consultant at McPhee, and we are a boutique organizational development consultancy firm based here in Toronto. We specialize in helping leaders to build more high-performing teams. And there's a lot of ways in which we do this, but today's webinar is sort of a taste of one of the ways we do, which is by sort of engaging in team development and leadership development. And so today we're going to talk about coaching conversations for high performing teams. And before I get too deep into that, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. You'll notice that we're in the webinar platform version of Zoom. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Zoom, but maybe not with this webinar platform. It's not that different than the regular Zoom meeting platform. The only difference is, I would say, other than the fact that we can't see and hear anyone except me, is that I'll ask that you engage with the presentation using the Q&A function. This is somewhere you can pop in questions as they go along, or where you can share comments or begin discussions, but I'll ask that you use that function because it automatically directs out to everybody in the group rather than just to me, which is what might happen if you choose chat. I'll also be using polls during this webinar, so keep your eyes open for those windows popping up. And I think that's it. Overall, I just want to really encourage you to participate. So I'm going to be doing a lot of talking, but that doesn't mean that you need to not ask your questions. So at any point is an appropriate time to pop a question into those Q&A boxes, and I'd be more than happy to stop and answer that question. All right, so today's conversation is about coaching. And I think that coaching is, when I think about ways you can improve your team, to me, coaching is an easy win. I don't want to say easy because it's not always easy, but a little bit of an easy win, because it's an area where with a few small changes, you can actually have a big impact right away, right? Because a lot of changes that we want to make to our organization to help improve our team, they can feel very daunting. They can feel like they take a lot of time. I would argue that improving our coaching incrementally is something that we can do fast for a significant impact. So that's why I think it's kind of an exciting thing for us to do in this little bite-sized webinar piece. The second thing I would say to introduce coaching is that it's important always, but I think coaching has become especially important during the very unique moment we're in with this pandemic. I think many of us are still working remotely, and even if we're not, the way we work with our teams has changed. But one of the things that hasn't changed is that we primarily engage with our team members through conversations. And I think that's been highlighted with the remote work situation that many of us are in, because we don't have some of the more informal in-person opportunities for engaging with and inspiring and motivating our team members. We really just have our words. Our conversations are now higher stakes than ever, and they mean more than ever. So taking the time today to think deliberately about how we can have more effective coaching conversations feels to me to be especially timely. So with that introduction, let's get her going. I wanted to start off with a poll. I want to know, and let me open my poll, hearing from you, in your work, how often would you say you coach members of your team? And I've got some options here. I'd ask that you just pick one. So every day, a couple of times a week, once a week, a couple times per month, once a month, a handful of times a year, and never. So I'll give a minute for those results to sort of trickle in. All right, and I'll share them. So as you can see, the majority of you would say that you coach your team members every day. And I think that's fantastic. I'm not surprised that there are some lower numbers here, right? A couple of times a week, maybe you have a formal one-on-one or a formal check-in with your team members, or maybe a couple of times per month. Maybe there's not that much that's formal set up. Also, for many of us, we might not always think of ourselves as coaches. I don't want to make the assumption that everyone who's listening in today is a team leader. And when we're not a team leader, sometimes we don't think of ourselves as a coach. What I want to encourage us in this session is to think about every conversation we have with a colleague, whether they are related to us laterally, whether they report to us, whether they're above us, as an opportunity to coach that person, with coaching being very broadly defined. And we're going to talk about that. But realistically, we should be able to have the type of coaching conversations that I'm talking about quite frequently, because at their core, they're simply conversations where we are focused on helping the other person to grow. And we all have the capacity to do that for our colleagues. So, for me and for the team at McPhee, coaching is a way of managing your teams so that they deliver more effective results. By building a relationship with individuals, we can coach people and help them to address the challenges that they experience. You'll notice that we've bolded the words they in these statements. This is because being a coach isn't really about you, and it really isn't about what you do. It's about what your team does. As an effective coach, you're not doing the work for your team. Rather, you're empowering them to do their best work. And that's where I sort of like the sports analogy. I'm not really much of a sporty person, but when you think about a sports coach, they're not playing the game, right? They're helping their team to have the best success when they go play. Now, in business or in whatever organization you're in, that's probably unlikely. You probably are on the field in some degree, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't think of yourself as a coach with regards to your people. So think about, where can I take a step back as appropriate and give them the chance to succeed and give them the tools to succeed. Um, so for me, a great coach creates a team environment where the best work is possible, trains their staff so that they have the tools that they need to succeed. And here's the part we're going to talk about today: they have effective coaching conversations where they redirect problem solving back to their people in helpful and deliberate ways so that they can arrive at solutions on their own and grow as team members. Now, this kind of coaching does take work. It is quicker to give someone the answer or what you think the answer is. However, for every coaching conversation we have with another person, they are less likely to come to us in the future with another issue, because we're doing two things in that coaching conversation. We're creating an environment that says, I believe in you to make your own choices. You don't need to come to me with everything. And we're using that conversation as an opportunity to upskill people so that they are more capable of coming up with their own answers where appropriate. So the investment of time in these coaching conversations pays off in spades and saves you a lot of time in the future. Because what's more efficient than having a high performing, independent, accountable team? Hmm? And I promise it's not that hard. Kind of related to what I said at the beginning. The stuff we're going to talk about in today's webinar are quick, easy fixes that you can implement and start to see results very quickly. So, fundamentally, coaching is about conversations, and that's what I promised we'd talk about today. And they're not conversations where you provide all the answers. They're conversations where you ask questions, where you ask the right questions to get people thinking and doing for themselves. The goal of a great coaching conversation is just to get the other person thinking and to begin to grow their ability to solve their own problems in the future. In his book, The Coaching Habit, Michael Bungay Stanier identifies 7 essential coaching questions for impactful coaching conversations. These 7 simple questions will change the way you engage with your teams and the way you coach. Today, I'm just going to go through all of those questions in detail, sort of drive them into your head and make sure that they make sense. The first question, which Bungay Stanier calls the Kickstart question, is very simple. What's on your mind? This is the opening question. It's about getting the other person talking and getting them talking about what's going on inside of their heads, not just the issue at hand. And that's why I like the phrasing of this. You'll see throughout the questions that I will suggest that you make them your own. You don't have to use the wording that Bungay Stanier suggests, but often I do like the very deliberate choices that he's made. What's on your mind is casual enough and informal enough that most people would feel comfortable answering it, but it has more of a depth to it than how are you or something like that. So I really appreciate this one. You can use this question when someone comes to you with a problem, when you have a one-on-one with a team member, or when you kind of know something is wrong, but you don't want to assume what's wrong. It's a very open-ended question, allows the other person to define the issue and direct the discussion. With these 7 questions, you do not have to ask them in sequence. In fact, often it's not appropriate to ask them in sequence, but obviously this is often your opening question. The second question is the ah question. And what else? This is Bungay Stanier's favorite question, if you ask me. His idea with this question is that every time someone speaks, there's probably more that they have to say or that they want to say. So whether you use the phrasing and what else, and I think that's very simple and easy to remember, or whether you use another way of saying it, the idea is every time the other person shares, ask another question that gets them to share more. Because often the first thing they say is not really the bigger issue, is not really the root cause, is not really what's bothering them. Most people need a little time and a little space to fully develop and share their ideas, even for themselves. They may not know until you probe them what's really going on and what's really bothering them. So the and what else question is one that you can pepper throughout your coaching conversation, and one to really kind of keep handy and not be afraid of overusing. Because you might feel like you're overusing it, but the other person is thinking about it, and the other person is in their own head and they're not thinking, oh, that person keeps asking me and what else. They're not. They're really working through their own issues. So it's a great question to have in your arsenal. The third question is the focus question. What's the real challenge here for you? I think this might personally be my favorite question. It's really smart. Think about it. You're asking people for the real challenge, prompting them to go deeper if they haven't already. And you're asking them, what's the real challenge here for you? I think what can happen in conversations about problems or conversations about issues is that there's a really natural way in which this falls into becoming a complaining session. It is very healthy for people to vent. And if you have a good relationship with somebody, they may want to just talk to you about the problem. And often the problem is something external. The problem is a colleague. The problem is a system. The problem is a force outside of themselves. The problem is not with them. That's what we're like as people. That's how we tend to see problems. This question, I think, very subtly redirects the focus to the person at hand. Okay, so you have this colleague who's driving you bananas, but what's the real challenge here for you? Like, what about their behavior makes your life hard? What are you struggling with? And putting it back on them is, I think, the first step in getting them to think about what they can do rather than simply becoming a venting session. So once we define the problem through this focus question, it starts to become something that we can overcome, something within our control. The fourth question is the foundation question. What do you want? So for me, I might have trouble saying, what do you want? That from my style of communication tends to be a little softer than that, but maybe what do you want is a phrasing that works for you. Either way, whatever language you choose to use here, the point of this question, at least for me, is to ask people what they're looking for, both from this interaction that they're having with me and from the problem or situation that they're describing. So again, easy to complain about a problem, hard to articulate the ideal outcome. This is a question that I've personally used in my coaching conversations a fair bit when people are, like, had a direct report who was very, very upset about a situation. And what I tried to guide him towards would be like, well, what might it look like if we could make this better, was how I asked it. Because once we can set that goal, we can begin thinking about how we can get there. We can begin moving into a solution-oriented mindset. So again, in this moment, I'm helping the person solve their problem, but I'm also training them to think through a problem and to become better problem solvers, which is a huge step in upskilling our people. Any questions from me? As I said, you can interrupt at any time, but thought I'd ask as I'm talking about questions. Okay. I'll keep going, but don't be shy. All right. Question 5, the lazy question. The lazy question is, how can I help you? This does not sound like an especially lazy question, but in fact, according to Bungay Stanier, it is. This is the part of the conversation where you build in a role for yourself. So we've talked about the problem, we talked about the issue. What exactly do they want from me? Often when someone comes to you with a problem, if that's the scenario we're talking about, they want you to solve it. But most people don't have quite the guts to say that to you. So asking them rather bluntly what they want you to do is an opportunity for perhaps for them to think back about what an appropriate request on you is and what really they should do versus what you should do. So I think this is a double-sided question because it gets them to articulate their ask, but also gets them to reflect on their ask because they're asked to say it out loud. Whereas usually in these conversations, someone might come to you with a problem, and if you're like me and you love to solve problems, you sweep in, you start thinking about the solution, and the other person gets to be the lazy one. We want you to be the lazy one. We want the other person to grow. So, how can I help you? My other tip about this is based on my own experience. Just because someone tells you how you can help, it doesn't mean you have to say yes. One of the biggest learnings for me as a person that I'm still working on is that you don't always have to be a yes person to be a good person. Sometimes it is in the other person's best interest to push back a little bit on requests. And the way I would do this is simply by saying, okay, I hear you, but which part of that do you think you can take on versus which part do you think I have to take on? What would really make the most sense here? And again, turn it back to them as a question. Make it another learning moment for them. The more questions you ask, the less you talk, the more they talk, the more they're getting out of the conversation. And kind of the better you're doing as a coach, I would say. Question 6, the strategic question. If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? Now, I mentioned at the beginning that you don't have to ask the questions in sequence. I should also mention that you don't have to use every question in every coaching conversation. I think this is a great example of a fantastic coaching question that does not need to be asked every time. I can think of many situations in which a question like this would not have been natural or appropriate. So just because it's on this list doesn't mean you should force it. That being said, it's a really valuable one to have in your arsenal. In some of my team development work with clients, one of the most common complaints I get from people is my team just doesn't know how to think strategically. They don't know how to make choices. They struggle with prioritization. There's a lot of ways in which this strategy issue comes to light. Now, again, our first instinct when we realize that our team members struggle with strategy or struggle with choice making or prioritization is to come in and make those choices for them or to prioritize for them or to tell them how to do things. But what that can lead to is micromanaging and like a stifling of the development of your people. Instead, if you notice that this is something you want your team members to work on, ask them questions that get them thinking about those things. And this is a great example of that type of question. It's a really simple question that at a very basic level forces people to consider opportunity cost and to think strategically about how they manage their time. And it says to them, this is a workplace and this is a team where you can make choices about what you work on. People like that. And in environments where people are given that modicum of freedom are environments where innovative thinking has a better chance of thriving. All right. Last question, the learning question. This is one that I think, again, is very valuable to bookend the end of the conversation. And it's quite simple. What was most useful to you about this conversation? Basically, all you're asking is, what did you learn? What was your takeaway? What are you going to leave with? This is, again, a valuable question, I'd say, for 2 reasons. One, gets the other person to think and to sum up your discussion. And 2, it ends the discussion. Depending on you and depending on your coachee, you may be like me, very chatty. The conversation must end. You must let the other person go back to their day and you must return to your day. So having a ending question in your pocket that sums things up on a nice note and sums things up with the other person talking and not with you talking is a big win. So again, a really handy question to have in your arsenal. So those are our 7 coaching questions. I would recommend keeping these somewhere accessible. So print them out if you have a printer, tape them somewhere where you work. I'm in like a weird little nook desk, so there's plenty of space to attach inspiring messages. A client that we worked with not too long ago, they actually made them into little stickers and gave them out to their people managers, and they had them stick them on their laptops. I think that's a great idea. We're also in this time where if you're working remotely, you can have crib notes for a conversation. So it is not at all weird to have your coaching questions in front of you when you're having this coaching conversation, because the other person will not know. So take advantage of that and have all your tools available to you so you can glance at them quickly and remind yourself of what's important and remind yourself of some questions that might help you get there. And so before we wrap, I have one more question for you, and it is a poll. I will launch it. But basically, I want to know, which of these questions do you think will be most useful in your coaching conversations? And this is one where I've given you the option to choose more than one answer. So if you have more than one favorite, I would love to hear it. So I'll give you some time to respond. Oh, it's so great. Thank you. I love watching the results come in. Give people maybe another few seconds to have a think. Okay, let's close the poll and I'll show you the results. So 60% of you felt that what's the real challenge here for you was going to be the most useful question. And in second was, and what else? And how can I help you? And if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? There's no right answer to this question, just like there's no right answer to the coaching questions. But what I wanted to do with this last question, a little bit strategic with you, was to force you to think about what you learned from this conversation. And I know this wasn't a conversation, so sorry. Which of these questions are you most likely to use? So think about the one that you picked and go forth with it and try it out and let me know how it goes. I will always love to hear from you. And all of us at McPhee are always interested in hearing from you and knowing how we can help or how our webinars have been helpful. So don't be shy to send an email. Let me know how the questions worked. Let me know if you have other questions about them. And you can always stay in touch with us by signing up for our newsletter at mcphee.ca/newsletter invite. Thanks again for taking the time to join us today. I hope that you learned something and had a little bit of fun. And we'll see you all soon.